Hey, what's up guys? It's your boy BrandoAKAMiracle for another video for you guys today. Today I'm doing something different. I know a lot of people are struggling in what to put in their Master Duel decks, and that's what I got these for you. Today I'll be showing you common staples that you can fit into any archetype or deck. Also extra decks monsters that pretty much go with any archetype. So I'll be starting off with the bottom portion, which are floodgates. These floodgates are commonly used in certain decks that have a slower type build that they need to over time do work. So the first one is Soul Drain, which monsters that are banished and in the graveyard cannot activate their effects. That's very counterintuitive to Tearlament, Salamangreat, Mathmic. A lot of decks revolve around the graveyard, and this card will help you with that. If you're also trying to counter decks as well, I'm also going to add that. Starting off, next up we have Goes in Match. Each player can only control one attribute of monster. So a lot of decks like to play just one attribute. For example, Goki plays majority of Earth in their core combo. Later on they switch to Dark. So this would be a good card to fit into your Cyburst and your other decks that play only one attribute. And now we have the opposite, Rivalry of Warlords. This card stops only one type. So if you play all warriors, all spellcasters, this is the one for you. They have recently limited all floodgates, so you do have to probably mix them together one by one. Next up, we have the OG original Floodgate, Skill Drain. By paying 1,000 life points, you can negate the effects of all face-up monsters on the field, and that does include monsters that are unaffected by card effects, though. All right. Next up, we're going to be using counter traps. I have two I've selected. Red Reboot. This is a big counter to the current meta of Labyrinth and Trap Tricks. I use this card currently in my rank up deck, and it's very useful to use to counter Labyrinth. So you use this trap card. As soon as they activate their first trap, traps are no longer allowed to be activated from the rest of that turn. And you can activate this card from your hand by paying half your life points. Very good card. Next up, we have Solemn Judgment, which pretty much is pay half your life points. You can negate pretty much anything. You can negate a monster, summon, or a spell or trap. That doesn't include monster effects though, so be careful. There's another trap that does that. That's Solemn Strike. Oh no. Alright, we'll come back to that. Next up, we have Imperm. Imperm, one of the best trap cards in the current meta. This card will stop monster effects right away. It is a UR. Can't find it. Well, we'll come back to it. Impermanence. You can stop your monster's effect from your hand. This card can be activated if you control no cards, or if you set it in a column, you can also negate the column activations, which it comes in handy a lot of the times. Alright, that's all the trap cards I pulled out for you. Now we're going to switch up to our quick play spell cards. Forbidden Droplet. You can send any number of your cards from your hand or field. So for example, you activate your Impermanence and then you activate Forbidden Droplet. That card is still face up on the field. So you could use the effect, you could use it as a cost for Droplet. And they cannot activate any cards in response to this card's activation. And their attacks are also halved. Alright, we're on to the next card, which is a staple in my opinion. I run this in almost every single deck if I have space for it. Crossout Designator. Declare one card name, banish that card. If your opponent, for example, activates any of these cards and you're running it as well and you have Crossout, you activate Crossout, send the card banished, and you can negate the card. It's an easy negate. I've used it so many times to either stop my opponent from Ash Blossom or maxing me, or even if they're trying to use one of their draw spells and you play the same exact one, you can stop them from drawing. Next up, we have Called by the Grave. This card is a must-have with the current meta of all hand traps. With a max C still being at 3 and not banned yet, you have to play Called by, because if your opponent starts off with a max C on your turn and you can't really do anything about it, you're in for a tough time. You're playing the comeback game. You can also use it on any monster. Ash Blossom, Effect Veiler, DD Crow, I believe you can use it on as well. Any of the quick effect monsters that have their effects in the grave. Nibiru, unfortunately, cannot be touched by Called by. Alright, so we have a generic spell removal. You can play Mystical Space Typhoon, which that's a spell or trap that just destroys, but this card banishes. So I prefer this over Mystical Space Typhoon. If you're more of a Mystical Space Typhoon, I feel like this is the better card for you. Twin Twisters. It's a 2 for 2 special. Pretty much the same thing as Mystical Space Typhoon, but you're doing more with the card, so it's better. Recently, this card just got up to 3. Super Polarization. This card is unstoppable once it's activated. You can activate this card, take 2 of your opponent's monsters, fuse them together into the generic Mud Dragon of the Swamp or Garura, Wings of the Resonant Life. Very 2 interesting combo, and it can't be negated by any means. Alright, so that's the portion of our quick play spells. Next up, we got our draw spells. Starting off with Pot of Prosperity. This one, banish 3 or 6 cards and you can look at the top of your deck for that many cards. You can no longer draw this turn, and if it is your turn too, you can only do half of the damage you could. So it reduces your damage in half that turn. Still, it's at 1 for a reason. I definitely recommend playing it, especially if you're playing a deck that the extra deck has cards that you know you're not going to use if you already have a certain setup. Great card. Next up, Pot of Extravagance. The same effect where you cannot draw any cards by card effects, and this card's a little different. Banish 3 or 6, and your cards from your extra deck face down, and you draw for every multiple of 3 you banish. So you either draw 1 or 2. So most of the time people go for the 2. This card can be negated by Ash Blossom. All of these cards I'm telling you, the draw cards can be negated by Ash Blossom. Next up, Pot of Desires. This is the one I like to play because I play a lot of decks that play multiples of 3 ofs because I'm a rogue player, meaning I know that I don't play one of a card. So if one of my cards gets banished, I still have 2 copies of it. If 2 of them get banished, I still have 1. If 3, it's going to happen once in a blue moon, but hopefully it doesn't happen to you. Pretty much, banish 10, draw 2. It's Pot of Greed with a little bit of a kickback. Alright, Allure of Darkness. This card, draw 2 cards. Then banish 1 dark monster. This is for those dark decks you guys are playing. Phantom Knights, Labyrinth, or you could use it in Labyrinth. You probably won't see it in Labyrinth. Any dark deck, this card is a great staple for you. Raid Raptors, I play it. Alright, we have one more draw spell for you. Upstart Goblin. This card, draw 1 card, your opponent gains 1,000 life points. This is good for the cards that use a lot of spells and have a lot of extra slots that they need to funnel their deck. Endymion, Exodia. You want as many draw cards as possible in those spell counter and draw decks. This is a good one for you. Alright, we're on to another category. Sending cards to the grave. I have 2 out. Foolish Burial, that sends 1 monster from your deck to the grave. Back in the day, this card wasn't as good as it is now, but a lot of cards have graveyard effects. For example, you're sending your Dark Magician to activate your Soul Servant. I had to think of a quick combo. I'm prepared. Next up, Foolish Burial Goods. A lot of decks these days, their spells and traps have graveyard effects. Especially, I can name Despia, Sword Soul. They play Foolish Burial Grounds for that exact reason. Tearlament also. It's a staple card in those decks. All right, we're on to another category, Floodgates. We're going to start off with the Floodgate that has multi-purpose. Lightning Storm. Destroy all attack monsters your opponent controls, or destroy all spells and traps. So it's versatile, but to activate this, you can't control any face-up cards. So this is a turn 2 card. You're going second, and your opponent already has some kind of a board. That's when you activate this card to try to counter and then go a little bit further. Alright. Without the cost of no cards on your field, there's Harpy Feathers Duster. Destroy all spell and traps your opponent controls. This card is very good for the Labyrinth, the Tearlament, the Spell and Trap. Despia plays a lot of Spell and Traps as well. It's good for that Spell and Trap decks, especially these Floodgates. This card will counter them Floodgates. Alright, next up we have Regeki. Destroy all monster your opponent controls. Lightning Storm, you saw, only blocked attack position monsters. This will counter any monster. And the same thing, except Dark Hole isn't limited and destroys all monsters your opponent controls. So if you're wanting to just destroy your opponent's board and Lightning Storm isn't good enough for you because it's limited to once per turn and only attack monsters, if you play 3 of Dark Hole and you just don't play any cards before you Dark Hole your opponent, it'll do the same exact thing. Alright, Nibiru. It's not as commonly used anymore, as I don't see it as much, but this card is insane. If you're playing against Link combo decks, decks that spam, and they get 5 or more special summons in one turn, Nibiru will wipe their whole board. And then you also get to special summon it to your side, and they get a token adding up to the attack and defense of the monsters that were tributed. Very good card. If you're tired of running into the combo decks like Sprite, Albaz, then Nibiru is the card for you. Alright, so we're going to go through the expensive ones first. Ash Blossom. There's multiple other hand traps, but the one I personally run is Ash Blossom. Max C is currently wrecking the format, meaning I play as many cards as possible that can counter Max C. So, what else can Ash Blossom counter? Ash Blossom counters from special summon from the deck. Labyrinth. A lot of Labyrinth cards get Ash Blossom instantly. Welcome Labyrinth and the other Labyrinth summons trap. If your opponent is adding a card, drawing for example, Pots, this card will stop it. Also, if they're special summoning from the extra deck, that counts as well. A lot of fusion cards like Branded Fusion, you can Ash Blossom, and that'll stop your opponent's move right in its tracks. Next up, Max C, the card that is wrecking the format currently and is still at 3. Possibly could be 3 for a while, or it could get banned. I would get it in while you can. I play 3 of Max C. Some players play 2. But this card is, if it's in your opening hand going second, you still have a shot. It puts your opponent in a position where, hey, if I want to continue playing, I have to give you cards to continue you playing to counter what I'm playing. And most of the time, if you play through Max C and you have the cards, you're winning the matchup. All right, one more. Effect Veiler. This card is like Imperm, except it's a quick effect from your hand. It only can be activated during your opponent's main phase, but that is still very commonly used, especially to counter monsters that have summoning effects. A lot of decks still do the normal or special summon. You can do this. Despia, Goki, Mathmic, all have that effect. This is a great staple card to have. Labyrinth has them as well. It is more of the expensive side, so I'm letting you caution yourself into it. If you're trying to counter graveyard decks, DD Crow is an excellent card for you. DD Crow counters my favorite deck of Mathmic, my current favorite deck of Mathmic, and it also counters a lot of other graveyard decks. For example, it could help in a matchup against Despia. It's not a full counter, but it will help in the matchup. And it's also an SR, So if you have an extra 90 SR coins running around, craft 3 of these, throw them in your deck, see what happens. Try it out. Alright, next up, Droll and Lockbird. This card will probably be currently in the future better meta than it is now, but this is going to stop your opponent from adding any cards. For example, if you summon Despia Aluber that adds the spell or trap, you won't be adding that spell or trap due to Drew and Lockbird. This card is very similar to Maxi. When your opponent activates a monster effect while you control no monsters, you can special summon this card and Psy-Frame Driver. So unfortunately, you do have to play one Psy-Frame Driver for this card to be active in your deck, but it's still worth it. And you get 2 monsters on the board until the end of your turn, which they are banished. If it's currently still during your turn and you do this, you could instantly go into a level 8 generic synchro. Didn't show any of them off, but I can show you a few of them. Alright, next up, our last of our SRs, Skullmeister. It's level 4. So I used to play this in Resonators when the game first came out, because it's also a summonable level 4, and it's a quick effect when a card is activation in your opponent's graveyard, negate it. So it's like DD Crow, but a little bit better. Also an SR. Alright, we're getting into the extra deck now. Mud Dragon of the Swamp King. Pretty much a super poly target. These two are both super poly. 3 cards are super poly targets, making your super polarization active at all times when you have it on the board. Alright, a generic level 10 synchro that has a destroy effect and a negation effect. This card reduces your opponent's attack and it gains attack, and it's not, when it's destroyed the first time, you can banish a card to save it. Pep, a good end card or a last resort. When your opponents are life points are less than your opponents, this card is unaffected by your opponent's effects. Next up, for an Xyz deck, if you run 2 Xyz monsters that aren't numbers with the same rank, you summon Utopic Future and instantly go into Utopic Drago Future. Alright, a number, Babushka, one of the most generic level 4 Xyz that will pretty much floodgate your opponent's board. Also, another honorable mention, Abyss Dweller. Your opponent cannot activate any cards in their graveyard this turn. Time Thief. If you have a trap monster deck, for example, Trap Trex and Phantom Knight, this card will place 1 face-up card your opponent controls on the top of the deck for 2 level 4s, and if one of them is a trap monster. Alright, Divine Arsenal Zeus. Pretty much, if your Xyz monster is battled this turn, detach 2, and you can nuke the board. Alright, we're on to our links, our generic links. Nightmare Cerberus, a link 2 that can target 1 special summon monster, destroy it. Phoenix is the same thing, but it destroys spells or traps. IP Masquerena pretty much is during your opponent's turn, you can link summon. Linking summoning any of your big high creatures to pretty much make it unable to be destroyed by card effects. Next up, I put this guy in the mention because there's multiple of them. For any type of deck you're playing, you could play one of the what's it called? The Charmers. Most commonly, you could be playing the Ground or the Light or the Dark because of Maxi. Nightmare Unicorn. Same thing as the Phoenix, except it's a link 3 and it shuffles a card into the deck. They also have a bonus effect. If they're co-linked, they draw 1 card. Alright, we're on to our big generic rank 4 and rank 5. Mech Knight, an awesome target for IP, one of my favorites. And it's also already not targeted by card effects, so it's very hard to out. And when it leaves the field and sent to the graveyard, it can shuffle card back into the deck. Appaloosa, an awesome negate. Depending on how many materials you use, up to 4, it can have up to 4 negates with 3,200 attack points. Access Code Talker, a generic rank 4. If you use anywhere between 1 to 5, you gain 1,000 attack for each link ratio they had. For example, most of the time I use Enko Talker, which is a Link 3, which causes him to have 5,300 attack points and also multiple destructions depending on the attributes of your links in the grave. You can banish all of them in one turn. It could wipe your opponent's board. And finally, Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. This card can use one of your opponent's monsters to link summon this card. If this card is link summoned, you can negate the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent controls, and it's unaffected by opponent's card effects unless they target this card. Also, it can negate one effect that special summons a monster. Alright guys, I hope this 20-minute video helps you guys out in learning some Master Duel cards. Also, I'm always open to questions. Make sure you leave a comment down below if you have any questions for me. Peace out, guys.